All right. Welcome everyone to the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. Thank you for attending, and we hope you are having a great conference so far. I'd like to introduce our next amazing speaker, Adnan Rafique. Adnan will be presenting a session titled Network Security is Not Enough When It Comes to Cloud Identity. Adnan, the stage is yours. Please go off unmute and take it away.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for the introduction, and I hope my audio and video is good. So yeah, it's an opportunity for me to present here in front of a cool audience on this virtual marathon. As my name is Adnan Rafique, and I'm based out of here in New Jersey. And some of the logistics we have on the screen share about Microsoft conference. So do make a note of that and follow the instructions going to the website, and we'll move on to the next slide. And here is our partners, vendors, sponsors, and this is for sure. Without them, we cannot, make this event possible. So thanks for them. It just went so quick. So all these partners. So without thanking them. And here a little bit about myself, but here is my more details. I've been pretty much involved in IT community for so many years. I have a lot of achievements. So those who are interested can always check it out, and always best way to contact me is through my Twitter account, which I prefer. So let's move on to the topic. And before we go there are raffles. So for this, you have to have at least 5 correct answer, and it says on each region: Americas, APAC, and EMEA. But this is one of the cool stuff I wanted to have on myself. So that's a VR virtual reality gadget available. So do make sure you enter yourself into the raffle. And also, there is a cause, community contributions. If you're interested in, go check it out. GoFundMe charity and International Medical Corps in United Way. Details are there, so you may want to go back and there. And here are the feedbacks. So I would highly appreciate after this session, you want to put my feedback and also the event feedback. So without further ado, we can move on to today's topic. So, and when I was putting this topic, let's say, because introduction I was kind of, so I've been like industry for pretty much 20 years. I've done a lot of cloud deployment for the 8-10 years. And for the last few years, I've pretty much focused on security, cloud security, information governance. And what I've been seeing more and more with the cloud adoption, and especially these days with COVID-19 and remote workforce. So this digital landscape is changing so fast, and things were supposed to be done for the remote work and digital workplace in the next 5, 7, or 10 years. Now it's disruptive. Companies do not have a choice, and all of a sudden they need to bring those employees for remote workplace, and which is good. You enable and empower them, but at the same time, security is a big concern. And what I'm trying to cover and make justification within this 40-50 minutes to kind of give you that mindset when you're going to cloud things, some of the things which are like cannot be ignored at all, and what are the best practices, and what are the capabilities available in Microsoft Azure, and what are the AI and machine learning tools, where security is going in, how you can leverage that. So that's the idea. And what I will be doing every 10-12 minutes, pause and take some questions. And also in the next slide or so, I will be asking you some questions because I think usually that's what I do in my presentation. Want to have some feedback as we go along because I think, in my opinion, it brings more value. But again, so you'll see it. I will be, so don't feel shy. I do not expect you to know all the answers because there won't be questions, just for me to understand who my audience is. So you'll see me asking some question. You can just simply type that in the chat box and we'll go from there. But again, I'll open the Q&A for every, I don't know, 10-12 minutes, and we'll see how does it go. So this particular slide deck, if I want to complete my presentation for an hour, I can literally just talk and talk and talk just this. If you read it, it's pretty much covers all these things with security, right? So with the digital transformation, it's increasing the complexities. Attack surface is growing. Uh, Data is exponentially growing at high velocity, high volume of data. And with more cloud, there's a huge increase in phishing attacks, ransomware, cyber attacks. So if you look at the things used to be there before, like, I don't want to go 20 years ago, we'll see some diagrams, but again, even 10 years ago or so, or before, or even the beginning of the cloud when Office 365 was launched, something 2011-ish, things are so changed. And since then, I've been involved in those projects. Now we need a smart way, more intelligent way of dealing with these kind of attacks, right? How do we make sure I become from reactive to proactive when it comes to security, and at the same time reduce those false positive. There's a fatigue alert, so much noise. So we'll see how we can leverage tools and capabilities available in Azure and going from point A to point B, basically. So so this is the report published in InfoSec magazine, um, I think a month ago, that where there's an increase in the attack for more than 37%. And the report is talking about the malware has gone up, phishing attacks, which is, I think, is the most uh, one of them, because it involves a social engineering, and if that compromise cause a lot of damage. And we'll look into that. I'll cover some and then we'll try to connect those different dots, how you should be, um, you can name it protect, improve your identity protection, or how it can help you to modernize your SOC, security operations, how it take you to the next level. So we'll cover those, and what do you have available, right? So, and this is the numbers I'm putting it because you what happens in security also, it's sometimes get a pushback, not necessarily because if you have a multi-corporation and they have invested millions of dollars, maybe it's fine. But again, every different business and vertical sometimes is challenging to get those things implemented and all that. So you also have to look at from the cost perspective. So I'll high level touch base on that as well. Then when you implementing these latest and greatest, but at the same time, the pricing and cost also needs to be justified when you bring those tools. And these are the numbers, like why, because numbers are so exponential and threats are different. So you have to have that kind of system available which you can deal with that in a timely fashion. You don't want to go and depend on those, and we'll go through those scenarios. What are those? What I'm talking about? But these are numbers to understand, uh, like here, like IoT devices. So now IoT, if you go back 3 years there, didn't exist. Now, recent example, because of COVID-19, there are sensors being deployed, and there are um, body temperature things, that collects your data, those kind of things. You have a wristwatch which monitors your health. So these are IoT stuff. So this could be HIPAA compliant or not. So, we can go into that direction. How you want to make sure those data do not get compromised. That's why when I was thinking about it, the root of the control where you wanted to control is the identity. Because think of it, identity as a service. And if you look at the research and articles, your identity is going to be same as your passports. You just need an identity and travel around the world. Same thing. You just need an identity. So how you want to be working around those and making sure your identity is secure and you have control and policies. You have single sign-on. You have a different type of authentication, MFA, not MFA, and all that stuff. So identity is the core, and how you're going to make sure it's protected. And the way the model is changing, app-based services in the app, in the SaaS and all that, that's all identity. And if the identity is not taken care with those control and policies, so you just need a one compromise, one account gets compromised and that's it. That's what happens in the cloud. So we'll look into those. And these are numbers talking about these, how much these breaches cost. These are just the average number, but we have seen, I'm sure, huge number that cost to these companies depending the breaches. And every day there's a breach, but every week or month you would see a huge or a breach which makes a number in the news. So that's is happening regardless. So you have to have those things. And good thing is that we have these things. We are in the conference and using Office 365 and Azure. So that's, I think it will get more interesting as we go on. So before I want to go on, I have a question for you guys. Uh, how, how many of you already in the audience? I would expect everyone, but is there in the audience who is not using Office 365 and who is not using Azure? Just type yes or no. Well, maybe no if you're not. If you say nothing, that's fine. Those who are not using. Okay, so we have no, nothing. Okay, that's fine. So we move on. So this is the diagram which talks about a traditional way. It still is common in many companies. You VPN in, and you will see, depending, I don't want to be specific to size of the company or vertical, but there are companies still not more open to cloud and they still want you to do the VPN. And from the VPN, you access to the network, but it's changing because when you go to the cloud. So, but again, in this scenario, it's traditional way, you go to the firewall and from their internal route, but this is changing if you look at, especially in the last 3 months, what's been happening. And as I told you before, the companies has never thought of going to cloud. Now, this is disruptive. Companies are forced to go to the cloud, use Microsoft Teams or other products and services. So this is old way of doing it. Now, when you go to the cloud, this firewall really doesn't matter. So here's an example of Exchange, because I did a lot of Exchange deployment in the past, and that's the way I used to set it up, and that's the way I have worked on different deployments. You have a firewall, you have the load balancer, your Outlook users come from HTTPS, Outlook Anywhere, or Outlook Web App, and go to the firewall, you publish reverse proxy, and then go to the backend servers. So at that point, you're still going through the firewalls, right? And then you are being authenticated, your local AD and all that stuff. And then you have all your monitoring and logging system, everything on premises, right? That's normally and still exists in most of the organization, right? Or maybe in hybrid scenario. We'll look into the future slide that how it's going to be changed, but that's the traditional or way, but these things changes as soon as you have spin up a single um, connection with the cloud, and then what we call it in this type of application a hybrid configuration. So in authentication happens in this process for the on-premises is, as I said before, on-premises, you go into the corporate network, you dial into the VPN, you may have your VM deployments and all that stuff, and your email relays, your application, everything is inside the boundary of that network. Even if you have your web-based application, you go and VPN access from there. So basically, all your control is behind those walls, which is the firewalls. That's fine. But as soon as you go to the cloud, things changes. So what changes, as we see here, this is the typical example where we can say it's a hybrid configuration. You have an on-premise network, you have cloud, you bring your own devices, you have third-party, B2B, B2C, and all that stuff. So if you go back to the previous diagram or this one and compare this one, so as soon as you're in the cloud, even if you hybrid configuration and if you have a past authentication or hash of a hash, Azure AD Connect, whichever, but your tokenization, everything is working in Azure AD. So basically your firewall is not there at all. You're being authenticated, your token and everything in the cloud. Still there are control, you can do that, but this is the more complex example I have put together. But imagine if you were just a cloud only organization, and then you do not have any even on premises, you're in the cloud. And there has been, and still there are like best practices, and there are article published. Well, I'll discuss that what are the gaps, and there are controls and people don't use that, and there were some breaches in 3 years ago, I remember, and Microsoft came up with solution was there, but people were not utilizing it. The administrators were not utilizing those, so that was causing. So when you come to the cloud, that's why your firewall is not enough. You have to be focusing on your identity protection. And when it's come to identity protection, then there is more than a layer, not putting the control, but also you have to have some policies where you can put those control based on the condition, as well as control can be put based on machine learning and AI. And the next level is how do you incorporate them in your security operations center, which is SOC, how it can help you modernize your SOC. Okay, so let's move on and we'll see. And if anyone has any question, just type in the chat box and I'll be more than happy to take those questions. So now cloud identities, right? So when it comes to cloud identities, we are talking about, in this particular scenario, we have Azure, we have a hybrid configuration done, and depending what kind of authentication method you're using it, so basically you're leveraging Microsoft Azure for sign-in process, single sign-in, and that's where everything is happening. So where's the disconnect? So let's say so what it has to do with ID, right? You're saying, okay, infrastructure as a service. Well, there is a scenario, then your company decide to have one example I gave it to you before. Let's say with Office 365, we'll talk more around that. With your Office 365 hybrid, where you have Teams and OneDrive and Exchange and everything. But it also has to do with IaaS because you're logging into your virtual machines in Azure AD. And what if those Azure VMs are not protected and you're logging in with the account is not protected? Maybe that account is the local admin on that machine and has a connection to your on premises. What if that machine get compromised? You're vulnerable to attack. Attack can be launched from there because now it's coming from somewhere in the cloud with Azure to your protected cloud or protected on premises infrastructure. So if that machine is not secure, if you have not taken some security protocols around that machine, no controls, That's a disconnect. And I've seen in many environments, people just ignore that and bring those machines up. And later, guess what? They get compromised. There was a breach, not in Azure, 3 months ago, 140 million user data got stolen because of unprotected S3 storage with AWS. And because the storage in the cloud was unprotected, is a clear text. So you have to think when you are going to the cloud, there is no firewall, right? Use identity again. So that's a storage account that you have no protection. You're vulnerable to these threats. People are scanning, attackers are scanning. They just need one of these kind of access, and breach could be anything. There was like 140 million user account got compromised or stolen. So if you have one of those kind of machine IaaS, so you make sure you have the controls. So we will see what are those controls going to be and all that stuff. But we're looking at this particular slide calling disconnects and the gaps, and we'll go on. Lack of change control. Okay. So if you're coming from on premises, you would agree with me, even if you have to have a service pack, if you have to make some modification of the software, you're deploying some images and build, you have to go through a change management control process. You have a company do follow those ITIL best practices, you apply them. But today, when you go to the cloud and Microsoft Team, as an example, is widely used. But again, if they release a package or Microsoft Office, they do have some control. But again, there is no change control. How are you going to make sure? Because the cloud model is so agile, change control literally in some scenario does not really work or does not really make sense, which is fine because cloud is not the same way as on-premises environment work. You have to change your mindset. Same thing, you have to change your security thinking from traditional security model to cloud security architecture, cloud security model. So that's why what you think you do with the change control on premises may not work in cloud, because that's why we say it's cloud computing. And then leads to another point, which is the protection of credentials, inadequate protections of the credential, because uh, you're not putting those credential the way it's supposed to be, like application impersonation, which I've seen a lot, where you allow your account and impersonation and application consents and all that stuff. Lack of use of MFA. I was talking about Microsoft did have MFA for long ago, but 2-3 years ago, administrators were not using it. Then they launched MFA for PowerShell. So there were some mail servers and all this got compromised, or there was some attack attempts, something around those lines. And everyone is a global admin. I have seen it, not one environment, many environment. I've seen many people with global admins and not with MFA, and that's it. If I have to talk on this one particular line, global admin, not MFA, that's it. You're done. I mean, in cloud, you're exposing yourself, because think of it, it's just like a root password for your Linux or Windows Enterprise Administrator. But it gets worse when it comes to the cloud, because everything is vulnerable, because your firewall, again, I'm going back, I don't want it to reiterate, but on premises, if you're an enterprise account, but you're still VPNing and you're going to physically to your office, do you have those barriers, protection layers? But you have a global admin without any protection, you're fully exposed. Somebody just need to breach that account and that's it. And so simple, so easy. So how it is easy? Because dark web, and when your Equifax and all this data get stolen, these are sold. And they launch brute force attacks and all that. This is how they get to know, because in cloud, your email is your identity. So they just need to do the brute force and then can guess your password. And they're like, they got 20 million accounts and there's a success rate of 0.7% or 0.8 or 1%. If 200 accounts are successfully logged in, if there are 200 happen to 200 different organizations, it means they all got compromised with global admin, and that's it. So that's why these things need to be taken very seriously. And we'll see how we can monitor and protect with capabilities available in Azure or Azure Security. So that now leads to is account hijacking. The thing what I've just talked about is account hijacking, like, and then phishing, in my opinion, is one of the most uh, increasing threat in the recent weeks. And I've seen people get or their account compromised again and again because these people are taking advantage of these days with COVID-19, for example. They send you an email and look very similar. And you and I may be more tech savvy and we kind of understand, okay, IT, we can hover the mouse and figure it out, but still we support the people who are health industry and retail and all that. So these people like do not have that kind of education, and they just click and they type the password and that's it. And guess what happens? Oh, I did not know that. But I'm sending you this email, but I did click on that. So this happens, right? So they just need one account, and what they do is that they do not change the password. They just sit there and watch you and monitor you, and then laterally compromise more account and laterally do these kind of attacks, and they sit there for a week, for a month, or something like that. And then uh, it can end up into maybe a ransomware, or it depends what their motive is, basically. And then, yeah, that's what I was saying, if you clicked on the phishing email or not, because that's what really important. If you clicked it, then make sure you report it, and we'll see what are the control. Even you can fight against phishing. There are controls you can at least get some protection around those also. So anyone on the call, would you like to share? You're all anonymous, I know, but type yes or no if you clicked one of those emails or not. While I take a water break. Okay. So now we'll talk about some of the good stuff. And since this session is two-part, because I talked about attacks and wanted to fill you in, and then we'll look into that. As I told in the beginning of the session, there's a lot of data in high volume and high velocity, and we'll see why their on-premises SIEM security incident and event monitoring is not a complete solution, and why there is a need to adopt a cloud model. Okay. Okay, somebody said no, so yeah, maybe someone who's smart who didn't click on that. And so what happens, so this is a nice graphic shared by this enterprise strategy. That's not me, I just pulled it from there. So what happens in a security, think of it as different island or different buckets. I've been talking about a lot about identity, which is your Azure ID, login, username, and password. One is called endpoint protection. I've seen companies deploying greatest tool, but some companies they just don't. And now Microsoft do have solution around that also. So endpoint protection, we are talking about desktop protection. We are talking about identity protection. We are talking about network. So you think, and there may be more, but these 3 and 4 are different source, different area where you need to be focused when you want to have a 360-degree view of monitoring. Because at one point you want to monitor the user logging in. Another thing you want to monitor what they are running on their desktop, because who knows the malicious code and how that malicious code can come to a computer, maybe through an email, maybe they have a USB drive or whatever. And Third thing, or the fourth thing, is how you want to make sure that computer or a desktop or maybe a server is compromised or have some suspicious activity is making connection out to the internet, making connection to the malicious IP, making connection out to those blacklist IPs, because compromise and their attacker is trying to make connection and stealing and collecting the data. So you see there is three different things. So if I have separate log for identity, I have separate data going on for my endpoint protection. I have my firewall has separate logs. So how effective am I? I have three different source of most critical data, not consolidated. So how am I going to make sure I'm securing enough? I have to go to three places. And how do I connect those dots? So that's the gap. And yes, you can do on-premises, ingest the logs, syslog and all that stuff. But that's a high volume. And you're in a hybrid in your cloud, then you have your cloud data and you have on-premise. You want to bring them on-premise? Okay, do it because you already invested millions of dollars on your solution. But that data is gonna grow exponentially. So from gigabytes, who knows if your retention policy for your company is maybe 1 year or 3 year, I don't know, depending which industry you are in and what your compliance policy is. It could be easily terabytes or maybe petabytes. I don't know, right? Depending how much logs and what type of logs you're collecting it. So what happens, that's not me, that's studies shows security professionals in those environments lose their focus from security to managing their security infrastructure, managing the storage at their network, managing their servers and all things on premises. And that's what the study says, that performed by, and then CXOs, they shared, okay, how do we focus? Because we run out of space, we need to plan. And on-premise space cost a lot. You have to have those, and you have to, like, it's not easy. You can just spin up a hard drive. You have to SAN storage, you have to have the network, you have to have capacity planning. So what do? We have a good news. Go to cloud. So, and now this will leads to this data, which is like, even if you go today, there's a lack of security professional. I was reading an article. There are already today, as we exist, there are 500,000 jobs for security professionals available in the market in US, based on here labor of department data until 2020 or 2023. This much is a job in demand, and because of now these days, people are looking for security professionals. So, and these are the numbers again from this same research company, that 20% of the SIEM requires a lot of personal training, but 22% SIEM is good, but not as effective at detecting unknown threats, which I will go back to my point where I told you three different gaps and how do you combine them, because there are three different gaps. It's not effective at all. And 20% junior people tend to struggle being more than, just looking basic dashboards. So you want to give them the valuable data. So in that cases, your on-premises SIEM may not work just because of the nature of the cloud. And then endpoint protection, this is what I told you before, it's usually pushed back. And some companies, the company I work, they use that, but I've also known some companies, and that we'll see what Microsoft is offering in that, because as I said before, cost or the pricing also matters. So I will not go to the deep and dive, it's not the licensing session, but again, I will cover on a high level. So anyone on the call using any SIEM today? Anyone? Okay. No one using SIEM? Have you heard of SIEM before? Any monitoring? Do you outsource it? Yes, no? How do you protect your identity? Are there any controls? How do you make sure You protect and you monitor, you use any MFA. Okay, that's fine. No answer is a good answer, then I'll keep continuing. All right, so what do we have? Now we talk about, I talked about all these gaps and um, solution not available, right? I mean, not the solution, the gaps and where there's a disconnect. And now we'll come to the AI and machine learning part of it. Before I want to go into Azure Sentinel, um, because I wanted to keep a high level because I don't want to do some threat hunting and I don't want to do like deep dive stuff because that's the reason I put it on a high level because I want to make sure when you go from this presentation and if you have 365 subscription takeaways that you will be able to leverage Microsoft Sentinel and you will be able to try it out for yourself. That's I'll make sure end of this presentation to give you that information in the next 20 minutes so you can go and try it. And why you want to try it, that's the point I'm making. I don't want you to go there and just try another tool without understanding. So for you to understand what makes Azure Sentinel machine learning AI. What is AI based off? What machine learning is coming from? They do have some built-in, and there are also some dependencies which is in the Azure. So since we have an Office 365 which works as a SaaS for the Azure, that's where the beauty is, and that's why identity part make the most sense. If you go to Azure Security Center, go try it out. There is a separate, can be a separate session for that. But if you go and look at give you information about your storage account, your machines, your encryption, there are ton of information available. But the one piece I'm gonna call out here is identity. When I say identity means your username and password. So Azure Sentinel is AI and machine based because it collects the data, which I will show you what kind of. And based on the data, it monitors and make decision based on that, and you can also tweak it. So the beauty of Azure Sentinel is, as I said, improved threat protection. We'll just look into that in the next slide or so. And the idea is that Azure Sentinel works on Microsoft Log Analytics. So think of it as a platform as a service. So the thing I was talking about, the research was done and security professionals on premises is cost a lot, manage the infrastructure. Now you can leverage Azure Sentinel as a platform as a service, which use log analytics as a storage pay as you go. So you don't really have to worry about managing anything. And the beauty is that it has free ingestion available for your Office 365. So if you have Office 365 tenant, you can sign up for Azure Sentinel. I think 1 month is free. And ingestion is also free. So you literally don't pay for as long as the data you're collecting from Office 365 and Microsoft Azure Threat Protection, Windows Defender ATP, and CASB, which is MCAS. So from data's four sources, ingestion is free. So there is no reason why not to try it out. Okay, so that's the free stuff, which you should be doing it. And why should you be doing it? So let me check my one or more two slides, then I'll give the real life example, especially during this COVID and all that, which makes absolute sense for you to go and try it out. But that's in a nutshell. If you want to have a high level overview, how does it work? Collect the data. So I told you these four data sources are free, which are called data connectors. So you're collecting your data from Office 365 tenant to your Azure Sentinel free of cost. Defender ATP, which is endpoint protection. So you have your Windows 10, Defender ATP, putting those into the cloud. For your domain controllers, advanced threat protection, sending to the cloud. Microsoft CASB, which is Cloud App Security, coming from the cloud to Azure. So now if you go back to my 5 or 6 slide where I was talking about different gaps, that gap is now addressed. All those signals or security logs and everything consolidating. So the way Azure work, they have a back behind the scene machine learning model. It analyze all those data. If a user is signing in and accessing some data on one box or Google Drive, if the system is compromised, the signal is now sent from desktop to the cloud. You know what I'm talking about? So it's all consolidating. And this is where the detection works. The machine learning based model is that it learns, and Azure security team and also the GitHub community, if you go and check it out, there are so many out of the box within Azure. There are templates available for analytics and other stuff there. But we'll talk about community later, but that's there out of the box. So you can just spin it up, start trying it out, and you'll be surprised. And then you can have investigation and you can respond to those threats. So there are two pieces. You have the seam and source. Some of those scenario where you want to have to be doing some automation. That's also there. You can automate the process. And some of them you want to have your SOC analyst to go and manually analyze it. So this is make your SOC analyst job easier, not to going 3 or 4 different dashboard and portals and hunting for those. Now everything is available in Azure Sentinel because collecting the data from all these sources. So that is what looks like a typical dashboard that Azure Sentinel. And if you look at here on the top, events and alerts, and then this chart kind of hover. If you do that, it gives you more details. On the right side there are incidents, and the bottom shows you the map. And I love this map because this map, if you look at on the right corner, it says 0 outbound, which is red, and orange. So I believe the red one is not there. So what it tells you, if your machine is making connection outside your network and which location, it will show in that pretty awesome map. So right out of the box, you have the map and you know what's going on in your environment, this machine, if they're making any connection outside, which is not supposed to be happening. So right there, it's a 360-degree view of your environment. And depending, the data is collecting. So again, go configure it and check it and all these things. I'm not going to go into the details of this, incidents and dashboard. We have hunting. You can have a Jupyter notebook. You can bring, you learn about Python, data connectors, analytics playbook, which works on logic app. You can automate that, all that stuff. So I think I do have more slides around that. Yeah, so connect to your all data, which I just pretty much explained. So this is another graphical interface. So what you would say, hey Adnan, you just talked about all things Microsoft. What if I'm using on-premises Linux server? How do I do that, right? What if my data connector is not available? Okay. So basically in the data connector, there are data connectors even available for Palo Alto Firewall, Cisco, all the big names. But just in case if something is not available, you can have a syslog server on premises, configure it, and collect your data from on premises to the cloud. Or you already have the investment on premises, you can still leverage and collect the data from your on premises to Microsoft Azure Sentinel. So if the data connector is not there, you're still fine. You're still connected because you want to have your all data logging into the cloud, and this is where you run all AI and machine learning. So that being said, is there are no gaps in their address, and you can also monitor AWS audit trail and logging in as well, because that's available. Because if you want to monitor and you have a single sign-on configured with your tenant.com and you're logging into AWS and somebody's disabled or MFA policy is not there, that will trigger the, you can configure, so you can even monitor what's going on up to that level. So you have to tweak and configure it, and you can customize it, fully customizable. And here's another example. You can bring data from anywhere. You can concern about security, which I'm always to want to make sure even at least you have express route. If you express route is expensive, if you're not, then gotta have some MPLS and TLS. So you have to make sure your logs are going encrypted into the cloud, and all these big brand names, they have their data connectors available. And if not, then you can deploy a server, maybe in Azure VM, or maybe on premises, and start collecting those logs. Any questions so far? Okay, no question, I guess. So I will move on. Yeah, we use monitor. Okay, people use MFA and monitor as well. Okay, so I do have one question. I will answer it. Just give me and uh, this tip, or maybe you have that in place, but I'll cover that. Give me a second. Um, and then if you have a requirement around GDPR, so you can have your separate workspace based on your location. So you can have log analytics configured based on the geolocation, and you can run the search query from one. So it's fully compliant with that if you have a requirement around that. Um, and there are some, like if you want to have some retention, you can do fine tune it. Um, you can have the separate billing. It goes to different subscription or around those. So you can also have the flexibility on those areas. This thing I like about integrated with ticketing systems. You can configure, I believe, workbook or logic apps where you can integrate with ServiceNow in other platform, or you can use Graph Security API or different ways of doing it, because this is where you want to make your SOC modernized, because you want to. So example is um, impossible travel, right? So impossible travel scenario is one of those scenarios. I'm going to talk about the scenarios while I have this screen, because what happens is this impossible scenario, it means if I'm in Jersey and if I am logging in for the last 30 days in Jersey and I happen to log in from Paris all of a sudden. So this is an impossible scenario, right? It's a perfect example. So what do I do with that? Do I block that account? Maybe, maybe not. What if I'm traveling? So in that case, okay, that's a false positive. So in that case, you want to leverage conditional access policy, which is in Azure. That if the user is signing in from this location and happens to sign in from Paris, for example, but how conditional access policies will work? Because that user happens to be, and if I change my location, Azure Identity Protection will flag me as a risky sign-in. So if the risky sign-in level has 3 levels, low, medium, and high, if that policy is configured for medium and high, then I will be then prompted again to re-authenticate for MFA, for example. So you set up those policy, hey, invoke these user for MFA if they meet this criteria. If they are just logging in from this location, do not even invoke MFA for them. So that's one way of leveraging that, which is a part of identity protection. But you can still have the visibility if you have seen, which is Azure. You want to pull those report. and your SOC analyst can work on those because you never know if the account is a legitimate compromise or not. So there is uh, Azure AI and machine-based learning. You can leverage those conditional access policy. Now I'm going back to your point where you're saying you're using MFA, but your MFA may not work if you still have legacy authentication enabled. If you go and check online, Microsoft Exchange team just announced something today or yesterday to support the modern auth for POP3, and there was some discussion going on block legacy auth. So give you an example, if you have more MFA enabled, but for the same mailbox you are not blocking IMAP and POP3. So I can have Outlook 2010 or old client and I still have the username, compromised username and password, I can still access his or her email without even IMFA because you're saying IMFA is there and I've seen those threads. So people using MFA to log on to services like Microsoft Teams or on your email on iPhone, but at the same time, if you're not blocking legacy authentication, this is a security hole. So somebody got a hold of that account and account is compromised through phishing attack or whichever, they're still like accessing your email. So in that case, your SIEM can help because you create those reporting, threat hunting, one of way of doing it, or you can enable Microsoft Azure conditional access and block legacy auth. Um, so those are the approaches you can think this would be your thought process. And um, I think we have few minutes. So one more thing. I wanted to add here because there's so much, as I said, if I had to talk like 2 more hours, I can go different scenario because I have not touched more on Azure Sentinel. What I want to do is that on Azure Sentinel, when you go and make sure leverage those data connectors, like for Office 365, MCAS, threat protection, and all that. Once you leverage those threat connectors, go to the analytics. Analytics has built in out of the box uh, controls available, and through that you can even create your incident, and that incident will work as your incident response. Incident response will be then send it to your SOC, and some of the incidents you can even automate it through logic apps. Hey, if this thing happens, take this action, and it will just block that, or based on whatever the policy you make, so you can leverage that. So that's you can automate it. You can get those tickets even created in your ticketing system. So Azure Sentinel is a huge. Go check it on GitHub. Azure Sentinel Ninja training is available from the product team itself, and it's unbelievably good product. Go to GitHub. It's community driven. So many things available, and there is no reason why not, because it's free. Data ingestion is free, and if for your leadership also, it can save you a ton of money when it comes to those, and you can also save up to 60% if you reserve the if you reserved on a storage. If you plan your storage, let's say if you need, so there's no commitment, but if you say, hey, I would need 2 terabyte for the next 2 months or three, something around that. So Microsoft give you that up to 60% saving if you do the reserve capacity planning. So that's um, another thing, because cost is always a huge factor also. So Azure Sentinel will give you whatever you need from that production point of view, identity protection, all those controls, seams, all there. But at the same time, also save significant money when it comes to security. So that's being said, I'll leave the floor open for questions. And if you have any questions, go to um, my Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel, which I forgot to put it here because I can share the URL is kind of big. So I put all these session. In fact, I put already some Sentinel session there, some identity protection, where some of the videos I've already talked about identity protection itself, not the Sentinel, and some of the Sentinel related videos are there, and I keep putting every week. how you can implement and secure your tenant within Azure and even outside third party and all that stuff. So you may find something. If you need, do check it out, or you can feel free to contact me on Twitter, and I'll more than happy to share with you. Yeah, if you have any question, let me know. Else, I think I'm good. And yeah, and thank you for the sponsor, our producer, and everyone who's in the call. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the session. Looking at the question, I don't see a new one. Let's wait. Nope.
How can you collect? Yeah, so here the question, how can you collect the logs from server? Yeah, connector on the server. Okay, that's a good question. So as I mentioned, for domain controller for Windows, you don't have to install any agent. It's what you call advanced threat protection, and that ingestion is free. So it's there by design. I'm not sure about 2012, but I believe 2016 is available. Maybe 2012, I have to check. I'm not sure. So there is no agent installed. So it's by design available, and ingestion is free. But if your server is not Windows server and a non-Windows server, then you have to have a syslog, and from syslog you can ingest the data into the cloud. It could be any, like Windows 10 natively supported, but if you do not have Windows 10, for example, or any device on premises, you can always leverage your common framework or syslog and then ingest everything into